my name is Etta Grace, and welcome back to our YouTube channel. Today, I'm interviewing Lila Mary about her upcoming book, The Night Auction. So, hi, Lila. Do you mind introducing yourself and who you are and what you write? And can you give us a bit of a synopsis about this book?
Hi, Etta. Thank you so much for having me. I am Lila Mary. I am an indie author of fantasy romance novels, especially queer fantasy romance novels. Um, I I've always been a romance writer, and I like to write the books that I think all queer kids wish that we had growing up. So, especially for a fantasy lover like me, there wasn't a ton of options about queer fantasy romance. So that is my mission, is to write those books for people growing up who want to see their favorite genre with their favorite kind of character represented.
That's great. And do you mind giving us a little bit of background about this particular book that you're writing? Because I know that you have several out already.
Yes, thank you. The Night Auction is a romance novel primarily. It is it takes place in a society where there are what's called Gemmis, which are an oppressed second-class citizen who are very powerful mages. They have very powerful magic that is heavily regulated, um, so that they can't use it. They are, as I said, second-class citizens, and the night auction itself is a an establishment where Gemmis can go auction themselves off for dates to the first class, the richer, um, the richer ruling class. And in doing so, Gemmis can earn themselves a bit of money, a bit of dignity, a bit of independence. But it's mostly about finding a way to get the money.
Gotcha. So this is the setting of the book, which we're going to be talking about today. And the two main characters are named Eric and Kiel. Let me know if I'm pronouncing that right. Um, and so
Kyrell,
Kyle,
Kyrell, yes.
Kyrell, sorry. And their relationship is that of one of the Gemini and Clear Eye that meet through the night auction dates. And since their relationship starts from a position that's based in this inherent power imbalance, and it's also a bit of a source of trauma for Eric, this Gemini who's been in one of these relationships before. How do you build chemistry between them given this uphill battle?
Eric has trust issues for sure at the beginning when he and Kyrell first meet. But as he gets to know Kyrell, and especially when Kyrell extends a hand to show that he's friendly, that he is not just like any other Clear Eyes, that he respects Eric as a person, that he shows that, he listens, he's willing to change his behaviors when he
Sorry. Pippin cameo.
piped up in.
Sorry, go
Um,
ahead.
Eric, Eric begins to trust Kyrell more when Kyrell shows that he could be trustworthy, is pretty much the simplest way to put it.
Awesome. So we learn through Kyrell that he has good intentions, but he still needs to unlearn things about Gemeyes and Clear Eyes and their place in society. So how does this affect their relationship since he still has some learning to do?
Yeah. I think this book was written sort of as a metaphor for queer people, right? Where Gemmis are the oppressed ruling class. And I'm sure many queer people have had the experience when they're talking to um, conservative family or just like strangers or even like, I'm sure a trans person explaining to a new partner maybe who doesn't quite understand. Queer people are very, they have to take on this role of education even though they may not want to do it. And that's exactly how Eric feels, is that he's thinking, I don't want to be responsible for educating Kyrell about everything that he's doing wrong and should be doing better. However, it still, of course, hurts when Kyrell does get things wrong, even if he has good intentions. So there is a bit of um, a juggle at times when Eric wants him to change but doesn't want to be responsible for changing him. And Kyrell fully understands this and takes the steps to learn on his own because he knows that it's very important to Eric.
Yeah, that's a really important dynamic to convey, I think, that taking the initiative to learn is a big step in being an ally. Thank you, Pippin. Thank you for joining the interview. see if he avoids eating my earbuds. Since Eric is a Gemini who's enslaved himself to protect his sister, who we later learn is a Clear Eyes, he's trying to protect the Gemini by killing other Clear Eyes. That's a complicated relationship. How does Eric feel about his sister? How does his sister feel about him and the choices he's made? Talk a little bit about that, complicated sibling relationship.
Yeah. Eric and his sister Brianthe would die for each other. They love each other very much, to the point where they're angry at the other when one of them sacrifices themselves or does something detrimental for the sake of the other, uh, which they both have a habit of doing. Eric has to go to the night auction to auction himself off for a date in the first place because he needed money in order to save Brianthe for something that happened years ago, and now that debt is coming back. He needs to repay that debt. So one could argue the reason he meets Kyrell in the first place is because of his sister, and she and him live in different cities because she uh, is hunted, wanted by the law. So she doesn't know immediately what he's done. But they love each other so much, and I think that really speaks to the depth of their relationship that they do go to these lengths for each other.
Yeah, I think it says something that Eric is willing to put himself in this extremely vulnerable and potentially dangerous situation for his sister, even though she's, somewhat reckless. That goes to show how much he loves her.
Hmm.
Moving on, the owner of the night auction is someone named Karis. Am I pronouncing that right? And that's a
Yeah.
Gemini's who holds a position of power over these other Gemini's because she owns the night auction, and she's responsible in part for facilitating Clear Eyes buying her fellow Gemini's. But she's also a friend of Eric's, and the night auction is a way for Gemini's to make money. So she's also empowering her fellow Gemini's. So how is she responsible for what happens, and how does that relationship between these characters develop? What is her role in the society?
Uh, that's a very good question. Karis is taking an imperfect situation and doing the best that she can with it. Uh, Her heart is always with Gemini's, and she straddles this line between Gemini's and Clear Eyes because she is the most visible, powerful, wealthy Gemini's probably to ever exist. And she has a lot of sway with Clear Eyes, but she knows she has to be careful because change comes in pieces. It doesn't all come at once. And the first step is getting income to Gemini's, even if the way that they're getting it is not perfect because they have to um, auction themselves off for dates with Clear Eyes who are certainly not always the best to them. There are, horror stories, but Karis is so charming and caring and really loves her fellow Gemmis and she wants the best for them.
And how does that affect her relationship with Eric and Kyrell in the story?
Karis is Eric's best and oldest friend other than his sister. Eric knew Karis when before she was the owner of the night auction, before she was very famous. He was there with her through her endeavor to build this place, through all the challenges that she went through, which are alluded to a little bit in the book. Um, and when Eric comes to the night auction asking, I need to go on the stage, I need to auction myself off for a date, she's, of course, like, whatever you need, we're more than happy to take care of you. Um, she's really like the backbone of all Gemini society, but certainly for Eric, he knows that he can always count on her and he can always go to her if things with Kyrell go wrong, as she fears they might at first. She's a really good friend.
I think that long history definitely adds another element of trust to that relationship that might not otherwise be there.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned that the Gemini's are powerful mages. Could you talk a little bit more about their magic, how it might be used as a metaphor in this book, and how, as our second class citizens, their magic is suppressed and why?
Yeah. Um, People fear what they don't understand, right? They want to control it or lock it away because they're afraid of it because it's just not something they're used to. It's not something they can examine within themselves. This is true for queer people. This is true for Gemi's who have these powerful abilities. They have the power to slow down time, to hypnotize a whole room with just their voice and their powerful commands. They can, no one really knows the limits of Gemi magic because it's never really been tested. That's how powerful it is. And so, half of society that doesn't have this kind of magic um, doesn't know what the limits of it are, doesn't know how vulnerable they may be to it. They they don't want to risk finding out or unleashing some sort of catastrophe, so they lock it away. Um, Maybe also because I think they're a bit jealous of it, you know. So all these things serve as a metaphor for existing as queer in today's society.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Was This is a little off script, but was there any inspiration for like the particular powers that you picked, like hypnotism and slowing down time, or just
Not
coolness
that I
factor?
Just coolness factor. I don't remember any specific inspirations, but I wanted to put a sort of mysterious element so that the reader could run away, let their imagination run away with exactly what the limits are, or lack thereof. There's a section in the book where Eric is pondering the the unknown limits of his own magic, thinking, if I stop time, how long would it take before it caught up to me? Like, could I just keep time going indefinitely? Could I keep it stopped indefinitely? No one really knows.
That's a really interesting question. The other Clarice in the book are forced to confront their deeds when they're faced with the prospect of reform, and they handle it in different ways. Like Kyrell obviously is one of the good ones, but what makes confronting Gemi's uncomfortable to both him and his peers?
Um, there's definitely the fear among the Clear Eyes of having to admit that they were wrong, which is a very human, a very mortal fear of, admitting that you're not perfect, admitting that you've made mistakes, admitting that for centuries you've been oppressing an entire people. I could,
I'm sorry.
fine. Um, Clear Eyes definitely confront because there is a bit of information in the book. It's not just about Eric and Kyrill's romance, though that is the main focus. There is some detail about possible reform for Gemi's and the future of what the society is going to look like and how Kyrell specifically is going to fight for the rights of Gemi's. He has always cared about the rights for Gemi's, but now he has even more stake because he has fallen in love with the Gemi's and he's seen more of their struggles firsthand than ever before. And so Kyrell works with the leadership of the city, the royal, like the royal mayor, pretty much, her son or her child, to he works on reform. He works on making a bill that will make some progress. Again, progress doesn't all come at once. We all know this, but it's a big step in the right direction. And there are some members of the royal family that want this, others that very much do not want this because they don't want to have to confront their own demons.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And I know that many of your books have an element of political intrigue, and so I'm interested to see how that develops in this one as well.
Thank you.
So, my second to last question is, what does this book mean to you?
This book means a lot to me. It's a darker book, that's for sure. It deals with some dark topics, some messiness, but uh, if I could help people take a lesson from this book, it's to not listen to the censor in your own head. I feel like we've fallen into a trap in like the past 10 years with, you know, thinking that if we read a work of fiction or watch a movie or anything like that that has some dark topics, that has some things that we deem unacceptable in society, then that makes us a bad person for being interested in those topics, or that makes the author a bad person for writing about those topics. Like the author must share these desires because they're writing about them, when that's just not true. It's fiction. It is fiction. And I think people should ignore the censor in their own head when they're reading a work of fiction. We all walk around with censors in our heads, and it's just up to us to learn to, you know, quiet those voices, knowing that if we enjoy reading about darker topics, if we find them interesting, it doesn't make us a bad person. It doesn't make the author a bad person for writing about them. Um, anything outside of like straight vanilla romance is seem like shocking in some circles. The degrees vary, but this book is very messy. It deals with imperfect things. Um, in the acknowledgments in the endnote for the book, I write a bit about how Kyrell is not perfect, and the city is not perfect after he's made his changes. No one is perfect, right? But the point is that we're all working to be better, and we're acknowledging that there is always work to be done, and there is always change to be made.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message. Um, Especially, I like watching a lot of like older movies and older media and reading older books, and there's a lot of messy stuff in there too. But I think it's important to engage with this kind of topics with a critical mind and take away from it, like these are like what these cultures were in the past, and this is how far we come, and this is what people are like, and there's a lot of depth and nuance to those sort of stories. And the story that you've described reminds me a lot of Arcane, which just came out recently, and a lot of people were really upset over season two because it ended kind of messy. Part of that was because it was rushed, but it also ended kind of messy. But like, I encourage people to dig into that and think about why was it messy, and maybe that's a good thing that it didn't all end up nicely tied up with like Piltover getting the justice retribution that they deserved. And there's a lot more complexity and nuance to the world than just black and white and right and wrong, and there's a lot of gray zones, and um it's good to explore that in fiction so that when we encounter it in real life we have a more um complex framework with which to approach it. And I think writing that is important too. So I'm glad we've had the chance to talk about that today.
Yeah, nuance is so important in all forms of media. I wish more people practiced their critical thinking. I wish more people really took the time to learn and understand nuance instead of taking things always at face value. Because there's so much value that we can learn from using nuance when we engage with media.
Mm-hmm. My last question is something I like to ask all my authors. It's a freebie. If there's something I haven't asked you yet that you want to just talk about, something that I haven't mentioned in the book that you want to ramble about, feel free to talk about it now.
Um, it's a very little thing, but it brings me a lot of joy about the book, where each of the chapters is named after a stage of dating. Um, where at the beginning we have the meeting, uh, towards the middle we have things like spending the night, meeting the family, trust, opening up, and towards the end we have bigger questions I won't spoil, but bigger, stereotypical things that people think of when they think of dating and marriage. So um, I love being able to fit those chapter titles into a fantasy book. It just really honed the romance theme for me.
That's very nice. I love when books actually have chapter titles. There's been a theme recently of just putting like the POV character's name or just the number, and that's so boring. Why wouldn't you use chapter titles? Like, come on, we're writers. Use your creativity. So I'm very glad that you have chapter titles and you have a creative naming scheme for them. That's really fun. So, uh,
Yeah.
what else do you have coming up, and where can we find you on the internet?
You can find me on Instagram at Lila Mary Books. You can find me on my website, lilamarybooks.com, which I would generally direct people to my link tree, Lila Mary Books, because that's where everything is sort of in one place and you don't have to go searching for a million things. So just look at my link tree, see what's there, see I update it pretty frequently with, whatever's coming out or whatever has just come out. I do have ARCs, advanced reader copies of the night auction available still. It releases in about a month. It's on July 1st. So if you want to get a free copy of the night auction, all you have to do is leave a review on Goodreads in exchange for the free copy. Um, I think I will have some more details about that in the link tree, I believe.
And then I
Um,
can leave links to all of that in the description of this video and in the transcript on my blog as well.
yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Etta. This was so fun.
Of course. Thank you so much for coming on the YouTube channel.
Of course.